That is our story for tonight. We are headed down to D.C. We'll be there for day 2 of the Zuckerberg hearings. Stick around. We'll see you tomorrow night from D.C. Tucker Carlson coming up next.
Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson tonight. Robert Mueller's investigation, you'll remember, was supposed to be about Russian collusion, the hacking of our election. Obviously, there's a new goal now. What is it? In a minute, Britt Hume and Professor Jonathan Turley join us to spell that out. But first, Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg spent hours on Capitol Hill today taking questions from senators about Facebook's role in the 2016 election and in American society more generally. We'll talk to one of the senators who was there and spoke to Zuckerberg, and more broadly, what it meant. But first, Brett Larson, an anchor at Fox News Headlines 24/7, who covers tech for our show, has the big moments from today. Brett?
It was quite the day, Tucker. Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg checked in with Congress today for day 1 of hearings, and we learned a little bit about the inner workings of the social media giant. One thing we heard repeatedly was exactly what Facebook is and is not.
What you think of as the Facebook service, right? Everyone has control every single time that they go to share that. They can delete that data anytime they want. Full control, the majority of the data.
Yeah, but sharing everything, not so much.
Mr. Zuckerberg, would you be comfortable sharing with us the name of the hotel you stayed in last night?
No.
I think that may be what this is all about. Your right to privacy, the limits of your right to privacy, and how much you give away.
Yeah, but with 2.2 billion users and in the wake of concerns about more than 80 million users having their data stolen by political consulting firm Cambridge Analytica, is Facebook your only choice?
If I buy a Ford and it doesn't work well and I don't like it, I can buy a Chevy. If I'm upset with Facebook, what's the equivalent product that I can go sign up for?
Well, there's the second category that I was going to talk about.
I'm not talking about categories. I'm talking about, is there real competition you face? You don't think you have a monopoly?
It certainly doesn't feel like that to me.
Okay.
Well, there is also concerns, Tucker, about First Amendment rights and just what control the social media giant has over what you see, say, and share.
You say that you have 15 to 20,000 people working on security and content review. Do you know the political orientation of those 15 to 20,000 people engaged in content review?
No, Senator. We do not generally ask people about their political orientation when they're joining the company.
No, Senator Ben Sasse asked a similar question about censorship on the site, and CEO Mark Zuckerberg said the speech they censor is anytime someone pushes to hurt others. Senator Sasse was also concerned about addiction to the social media site.
As a dad, do you worry about social media addiction as a problem for America's teens?
Well, my hope is that we can be idealistic but have a broad view of our responsibility.
And Tucker, we will get more from Zuckerberg tomorrow when he sits down for day 2. He has certainly been very frank in his responses and a little obtuse about specifics, which made the lack of understanding of exactly how Facebook works and our understanding of it very clear.
Thanks for that, Brett. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana was one of the many senators who spoke to Zuckerberg today. Here's part of it.
Here's what everybody's been trying to tell you today, and I say this gently. Your user agreement sucks. I'm going to suggest to you that you go back home and rewrite it. And tell your $1,200 an hour lawyers, no disrespect, they're good. But tell them you want it written in English.
Senator Kennedy joins us tonight. Senator, thanks for coming on.
You bet.
What was the point of this hearing there? What laws are you all considering to constrain Facebook?
You know, Tucker, I was mildly disappointed with the hearing. I mean, I wanted the point to be, I wanted Mr. Zuckerberg to step up to the plate and say, look, 3 words, I'm on it. I get it. It can be fixed. I'm going to fix it, and we'll do it together. That's not what I heard. I just didn't feel like we connected with Mr. Zuckerberg today. I mean, look, Facebook is an extraordinary company. It's done magical things, but it's clear that the digital promised land has some minefields in it. One's the privacy issue. The other is the propaganda. And I don't want to have to vote to regulate Facebook, but by God, I will, unless they're willing to step up to the plate and address those two issues. I think they can. I hope they can. If they can't, we've got a bigger problem than just what we talked about today.
So here you've got the biggest provider of news in the United States with far more power than William Randolph Hearst ever had, with a long and proven track record of censorship in this country and other countries, with the power to change election results. You don't think that's enough of a threat right there to act?
Well, I think that's a very important issue. Senator Cruz, Senator Sass made that point. I ran out of time. I wanted to make that point. I mean, everybody says, and I think it's true, poison is being spread on social media. Okay, what's poison?
Right.
Define poison. And look, I wanted a lot of our Democratic friends have made a big deal about, well, Cambridge Analytica, and they work with President Trump. I wanted to ask Mr. Zuckerberg today about this statement that was made by somebody, Ms. Carol Davidson from President Obama's re-election campaign in 2012. This is what she said. She ran media analytics for the president. She said, Facebook was very candid that they allowed us to do things they wouldn't have allowed someone else to do because they were on our side.
Right.
I wanted to ask if that's an accurate statement, but I ran out of time.
So you don't think, I mean, finally, the Congress would have really uniquely the ability to get this under control. If you think that too much power is vested in one company and they're, in effect, enemies of the First Amendment, I know Republicans don't like to regulate things, but do you think we're approaching a point where, for the good of the public, that may need to be done?
I don't think we're there yet, but I think a lot of it depends on how Mr. Zuckerberg reacts to this. I'll say it again, there are two issues. One's a privacy problem, the other is a propaganda problem. And the issue there is, how do we solve it without impinging on people's First Amendment rights? Now, that's a tough one.
It is a tough one.
And I want to be assured, didn't get today, maybe we'll get it in the second round, that Facebook is not politically biased one way or the other. I don't want them pitching for the Republicans. I don't want them pitching for the Democrats either, though.
Yeah, well, they are. Senator, thank you. Great to see you.
You bet.
For more discussion of what happened today, Dave Manning is a tech entrepreneur and a fan of Facebook. Roger McNamee was one of Facebook's first investors and now a critic sometimes of the company. Both of them join us. So, Roger, first to you. The head of Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg, said today that he and the company are happy to censor hate speech, but was unclear exactly on what hate speech is, and then suggested that maybe artificial intelligence will settle that question. If you care about freedom of speech, does that make you uncomfortable?
The whole thing makes me uncomfortable, Tucker. I think the fundamental issue we've got here is that the business model is based on inflammatory emotions, anger, and fear. And once you build a business model on that, it's really the genie's out of the bottle and there's no way to put it back in. And Facebook has shown itself to be less than good at managing the dialogue on its site. And as you pointed out, they are absolutely editing everything. There are a million different things they could show me at any moment in time. They picked the 20 that serve their business model best, and quite clearly they have failed on that, precisely as Senator Kennedy just described.
So, Dave, we had a researcher on, a psychologist, recently called Robert Epstein, and he's taken a look at a bunch of different tech companies, and he said specifically about Facebook, if Mark Zuckerberg had sent a targeted message to people identified on Facebook as Hillary voters and encouraged them to vote, he estimates it could have changed the vote totals by 450,000 on Election Day 2016 and changed the course of the election. That's a lot of power for one media company to have. Even if you're for Mark Zuckerberg's political views, should any company have the ability to change election outcomes the way Facebook does?
No, I think you're giving him too much credit. I am not. First of all, I'm not a fan of that political worldview. I am a fan of free enterprise and letting them do what they will. I mean, by that standard, you could say how many people's votes does the New York Times editorial choosing a candidate or anybody else's make an influence. So I don't have I'm very wary of the Facebook site as a user. But this discussion about should we censor them and knock back their political influence, and are they a gigantic monopoly? I mean, I think that's crazy.
But they're literally a monopoly. So in the digital ad space,
they're not a monopoly, Tucker.
Yeah, well, they are.
Tucker,
they are actually. I know because I know the numbers. I've worked in this area a lot for 8 years. Let me just give you the following number. So Facebook and Google control over 90% of digital ads. So that means if you run news or anything else that's ad supported online, you're beholden to them. They control the market completely. Why is that not a monopoly?
If you want to say it's a monopoly for digital ads, that's fine. If you want to say it's a monopoly for political content, it's not.
But hold on. Digital ads are what supports all online news coverage apart from the nonprofits. That's the whole deal right there. If you control the ads, you control the companies.
Tucker, are you worried about a monopoly in the digital ad business, or are you worried about a concentration of political power?
Well, I don't think there's a distinction between those two things. I'm worried, in addition to both, by the total inability of the Congress to respond to a looming threat to its own legitimacy from Facebook and Google. Roger, am I being insane here? I don't think
Tucker,
that I am.
I'm on your side on this issue because at the end of the day, the problem we have here is a massive concentration of power. And that concentration of power is in the hands of people who preserve the rights of the First Amendment for their corporations, but they tend to overlook the First Amendment rights of the people who are the users of the sites. And in that process, I mean, what we have is these things that are global. They are influencing democracy all around the world, and we can't find a single example of them influencing it for the better. And I'm with Senator Kennedy. I mean, this thing has gone on both sides. We've seen massive abuses of Facebook on both sides of this thing, and it doesn't look good either way. And we need to reduce Facebook's influence so that we don't have it determining the outcome of any election, whether it's 2012, 2016, 2018, or 2020.
Well, so I think that's right, because in the end, Dave, this is not an American company, or more precisely a company that sees itself as an American company. I would argue that it in effect is, but they don't believe that. Google doesn't either. They're companies of the world, and yet they have more influence potentially over our voting patterns than Russia or China or any other government. So, like, why wouldn't that be a threat to democracy? I don't understand.
And the worst part of it, Tucker, is that they behave as though they don't have any influence. And as a result, bad actors have been able to manipulate the system, essentially undefended. And to David, my simple point here is that, having watched this company from its earliest days, it has evolved into something very different than it started out as. And I, too, am a believer in free enterprise. But I'm also a bigger believer in democracy, and I don't believe any company's rights come before the rights of the people of the United States.
So, Dave, I'm going to let you sum it up. Does that concern, did any of this bother you? I get that you're for free enterprise. I admire that. But did any of this bother you at all?
I largely stopped using the app in January when they went through their latest news revision to decide what I could see and not see. But that doesn't mean that I believe that Senator Kennedy or those other knuckleheads down there today in that hearing, which gives, I'd say it was a goat rodeo, but that's unfair to goat rodeos. Like, you can't let those people make those decisions. Consumers have to make those decisions. And your assertion that it's an unbreakable monopoly, it's just not.
Well, it's not only unbreakable, it's growing in the Anyway, thank you both. We're out of time, sadly. Appreciate it.
Take care.
Tonight, in just the past 12 minutes, we've seen evidence that 2 other cable networks are colluding with the New York Times to put out negative stories on the Trump administration. Sort of. Our proof, and both Brit Hume and Professor Jonathan Turley coming up next. CNN, MSNBC, and the New York Times are working together tonight to push a new story about the Trump administration. At the top of the hour, MSNBC put on Maggie Haberman, CNN put on Michael Schmidt. Those 2 are both Times reporters, and they co-authored a piece in that newspaper saying that Donald Trump attempted to fire Robert Mueller in December. Mueller's still there, of course. The Mueller investigation, you'll remember, was officially created to uncover Russian hacking into the American democracy because they hacked our democracy. But that's not what it is anymore. It is now an all-purpose probe into the president, his personal and financial life. It's designed to make us feel safer. I hope you feel safer. Yesterday, FBI agents raided the office of Michael Cohen, that's the president's personal lawyer, apparently looking for evidence about payments to Stormy Daniels the porn star who is not from Russia and who did not hack our election in any case. Over on MSNBC, Steve Schmidt noted that the men who wrote the Constitution would be thrilled by this. They always hated the Bill of Rights, those guys.
If you listen closely tonight, you can hear the faint applause from heaven of this country's founding fathers, who bequeathed to us a nation where the rule of law is supreme. We are a nation of laws.
Yeah, the founders wanted to know, did the money go to Stormy Daniels? What happened to Stormy Daniels? Jonathan Turley is professor at George Washington University School of Law, and he joins us tonight. So I think, Professor, you were one of the trustworthy people in this conversation. I don't even know what your politics are. I don't think we even agree politically, but whatever. I trust your legal views. What do you make of this raid on the president's lawyers' offices?
Well, part of this is of Cohen's making, in the sense that Cohen tends to blur his relationships between being a lawyer, a fixer, a friend,
That's true.
A business partner. That's dangerous under any circumstance, but it's particularly dangerous if you're going to invoke the attorney-client privilege, because first you have to prove that you're acting like an attorney. And he may have trouble with that. When you look at the Stormy Daniels agreement, it's still not clear what role he's playing there, whether he is this company he created, whether he's Trump's lawyer. That's going to come back to haunt him and haunt the president when they say some of this stuff should remain confidential. But I think the president's right in the sense that whenever you have a raid on an attorney's office, it should raise very troubling concerns for everyone. I mean, this is a serious problem when someone can't rely on their attorney.
So is the core potential violation here that the payments to Stormy Daniels, Miss Daniels we'll call her, were some form of campaign finance violation?
Well, actually, that is strengthening with some of the statements made publicly. When the president said, I didn't know anything about this payment, it sounds a lot like what's called an in-kind campaign contribution. And that's what John Edwards was charged with and prosecuted for. He ultimately was not convicted of that. But yes, they could make a case like that. But supposedly the warrant covers everything from Stormy Daniels to taxi medallions. And there's a lot in between.
Is there any indication that Stormy Daniels was working with Russian agents to influence the outcome of the election, that she was herself part of the hacking of our democracy?
Well, I'm not familiar with all of her movies, but no, I'm not familiar with
Okay, so I guess we can say that the nature of the investigation has changed profoundly.
Oh, absolutely. No, there's no question that this is far off the mark. So was Manafort. What's actually sort of fascinating about this is that Rod Rosenstein didn't have much of a problem when Mueller came to him and said, I want to expand Manafort's investigation to include stuff that occurred years before and were not connected to the campaign. Some of this stuff is actually closer, and yet Rosenstein said, I want the Southern District to do this.
Could Rosenstein have said, no, that's not the original charter of this, that's not the point of this investigation?
He could have, but it gets a little bit tough. If Mueller came to him and said, look, we actually have evidence of crime that we have uncovered, it's hard not to give that to a prosecutor to look at. But we don't know what was shown to Rod Rosenstein, and that's part of the problem.
So you would have to, I think what you're saying is you would have to be either dumb or an active drug user to allow an independent counsel investigation to start.
Well, I think that, look, this is one of those things where it's easy to unleash the dogs of war. It's harder to get them back.
Yeah, I know.
And and a special counsel is a torpedo in the water, to use another metaphor, and he's still there. And what's interesting about this move is that they haven't just expanded the investigation, they've expanded the prosecutors. So now, even if the president moved against Rosenstein, moved against Mueller, it wouldn't necessarily stop what the Southern District is doing.
Jeez. Thank you for that, Professor Jonathan Turley. Appreciate it. Democrats are gearing up for an impeachment push against the president. What's the point of that, and what will the outcome of it be, assuming they take back the House in the midterms? Brett Hume joins us next.
Turmoil, particularly this last week. Has the president at any time thought about stepping down before or now?
No, and I think that's an absolutely ridiculous question.
Well, nobody can quite, in the light of day, tell you why the Stormy Daniels story is so significant, but clearly it is, judging by the airtime it gets. It's more important than the looming war in Syria, more important the fact our economy is being eclipsed by China, more important than the vanishing American middle class or the tens of thousands who will die of drug ODs this year. In fact, it matters so much that President Trump should consider leaving office over it. Does anyone who doesn't work in the media believe that? Britt Hume is our senior political analyst here at Fox, and he joins us tonight. So, Britt, maybe I'm blinded by my reflexive revulsion about this story, but is it, in the scheme of stories, considering the world is on fire and changing faster than we can keep up with, is the Stormy Daniels story as significant as the airtime it's getting, do you think?
Of course it's not. The problem with this story from the start has been this. It doesn't tell us anything about Donald Trump that we didn't already know or should have known. Indeed, this story itself came out, at least the piece that he had this liaison with her, came out before the election. Americans who voted for and against Donald Trump knew, or should have known, that he was a habitual philanderer. He'd made a great public spectacle of it in the past, that he was a man with a taste for flashy women. The story was entirely credible and remains so to this day. And the fact that he denies it is a detail. I don't think most of the people who are for him think that his denial is true. But it simply doesn't rise to the kind of level you're talking about here, unless you want to take very seriously the possibility that the money paid to keep her from blurting all this out sooner was a campaign contribution that well exceeded the proper limits for campaign contributions. That is about as big as you can get it to be, as far as we know.
That seems like a pretty tenuous connection to news. Just me. By the way, I think the other channels have covered this exclusively since we started 28 minutes ago. I mean, that's all they've covered for this hour so far.
Well, I think there's a lot of excitement about the search of the Cohen offices and so on. But when the question that still you have to answer here is, what really is the underlying crime, and does it rise to the level of something for purposes of impeachment, or, as the questioner at the briefing said, the possibility that Trump would resign? That's an interesting question, of course, Tucker. Does anything about Trump's behavior in reaction to any of this suggest that this is a man contemplating quitting? I would say, obviously, palpably not.
I'm not sure that he or anyone in the White House fully understands what would happen if Democrats take the House this fall, as many polls suggest they will. It seems like the very top of their agenda will be impeaching President Trump. That's what their voters want. Yesterday, Congressman Beto O'Rourke of Texas, who's running against Cruz in the Senate race, said he would vote to impeach Trump, although he acknowledged it wouldn't make sense to do it right now. But Democratic voters want impeachment. Do you think Democratic members, if they take control of the House, can do anything but start an impeachment?
Well, I think there'll be moves in that direction. Of course, the last time this was done, when the case of Bill Clinton and the charges there were, among others, perjury and obstruction of justice, that were pretty thoroughly documented. He'd obviously lied to a grand jury. They did it. They impeached him in the House, and he was not anywhere near convicted in the Senate, and he ended up leaving office in something like a blaze of glory. And it kind of backfired politically on the Republicans. And Democratic politicians, those in the House of Representatives, might be given some pause by how all that turned out. But you're right about the base. The Democratic base cannot stand the ground that Trump walks on. They want him out, and they want him impeached, and they want their members to be part of the resistance. Little Mr. O'Rourke, running against Ted Cruz in Texas, seemed a little confused about how impeachment worked, because he's running for the Senate, and the Senate doesn't vote to impeach. The House votes to impeach. The Senate votes on whether or not to convict. But that aside, his sentiments reflect that of many Democrats, and I think there'll be a move to do it if, in fact, they get control of the House. How well it will work out for them politically remains to be seen.
It does remain to be seen. Britt Hume, thanks, as always. Great to see you.
You bet.
Well, all the geniuses here in Washington are unanimous on this question. We must attack Syria, and anyone who asks questions about why we must attack Syria is obviously, by definition, working for Vladimir Putin. How has this happened? How is almost everybody in power lined up behind yet another military intervention? Is the public crying out for one? Glenn Greenwald has watched this fairly carefully, and he joins us next with an answer. Well, virtually all of official Washington, Republicans and Democrats, have united behind the idea that the United States has a moral obligation to go deeper into war in Syria. We already have thousands of troops in Syria, though you wouldn't know it from watching the other Robert Mueller-based channels. They're all Stormy Daniels all the time. But it's true we do, and one American soldier's already died in Syria. We've killed hundreds of Russian citizens so far there and lobbed in a series of cruise missiles. But that's not enough, the pundits say. We need a real war, something big and deadly, primarily to avenge the Syrian president Assad's poison gas attack on his own citizens over the weekend. Here's some of the growing consensus on that.
Assad and his inner circle should be considered war criminals, legitimate military targets. If you have the opportunity to take him out, you should.
It's very clear to me that this president, after using such rhetoric on Sunday, has to take stronger military action than we did last year.
We have a leader who is now a war criminal supported by the Iranians and the Russians. That demands a strong and risky response. If the West won't stand up when a leader uses gas multiple times against his own people, we live in a very dangerous world.
So that's the consensus. Last night we asked the obvious questions about it. Before we go to war, are we sure all of this is real? Do we really know that Assad was behind the gas attack? It's not a defense of Assad, but it's an obvious question. How could we know that conclusively so soon after the attack happened? We didn't have any Americans on the ground. And why would Assad do that, given the certainty it would hurt his own interests? And while we're on the subject, by the way, why is a war in Syria a good idea for the United States in the first place? How would it make us safer, happier, more prosperous? Those seem like reasonable questions to us. In fact, the exact questions you'd want your policymakers to ask. But no, they're not asking them, and they're offended to hear them. The first person we asked those questions to, Republican Senator Roger Wicker of Mississippi, implied that we were somehow allied with Vladimir Putin just for asking. Other than that, Wicker had no answers at all. It was embarrassing, and he didn't seem embarrassed at all. Others just denounced us right off the top. Jennifer Rubin of the Washington Post tweeted this, quote, "He is insane," meaning me. "Fox is not a news organization. That is all." Noah Rothman of Commentary called this show, quote, "nothing less than undiluted Russian propaganda." Seth Mandel of the New York Post summarized the criticism perfectly when he tweeted this, very simply, "Shut the F up." These are journalists, by the way. No explanation. Of course, shutting the F up is the whole point of tweets like that. They want you to be quiet. They want you to do what you're told. No more questions. Shut up and obey. There's no chance of that, though. Sorry. Glenn Greenwald has been following all of this. He's an founding editor at The Intercept, and he joins us tonight. So, Glenn, leaving aside the real question of how you should respond to Syria and is it a threat to the world order, to us and to its neighbors, I think those are all fair questions. But why the universal attempt in the media here in this country, left and right, to shut down a meaningful conversation about it?
The only time I think that the media praised Donald Trump was almost 1 year ago today when he bombed an airfield in Syria in response to what had been alleged at the time was a chemical attack by the Assad regime. People who hate Donald Trump and go on air every day took a break for 24 hours to proclaim him presidential, because that's what U.S. presidents in their eyes do, is they just drop bombs on other countries with no declaration of war, no reason why the U.S. interest or the U.S. borders are at stake when it happens. So I think that that's just the ethos in Washington, that not only is it just an inherently good and presidential thing to do to drop bombs on other countries, that's why polls around the world show that the greatest threat to world peace in the eyes of the public around the world is the United States. But also, Adam Smith wrote 300 years ago that the reason people who live in capitals and the elites in countries love to watch their countries bomb other countries is because it gives them a sense of excitement and purpose and kind of this pulsating stimulation, and I think that's a really big part of it. It doesn't matter whether it will accomplish anything. It just makes us feel strong and powerful and purposeful to do, and so just bombs away.
I think that's right. I mean, I think human nature explains a lot of this. I agree completely. But journalists exist to push back against that. Not necessarily against war, but against a heedless rush toward anything. I mean, our job is to be skeptical and ask real questions. Why is no one doing that, and anyone who does is attacked?
So, just about every name that you mentioned in the media who attacked you for raising questions about whether or not we ought to actually go and bomb another country are all essentially neocons. They're the same people who were doing this in 2002 and 2003, saying anyone who asked questions about whether we should actually go to war and remove Saddam Hussein was an admirer of the Saddam regime. They did the same in 2011 when it came time to remove Gaddafi. They said if you're against that war, it means you love Gaddafi.
and you want to see him slaughter people. It's just the standard tactic. And what we have now is this kind of union between neocons who have now once again kind of been embraced by both the establishment wings of the Republican and Democratic Party, and the militarists in both parties, people like Lindsey Graham and lots of Democrats who love every single war. And so this climate arises that you're just supposed to cheer when it comes time to drop bombs on other countries, not ask whether there's evidence to justify it, not ask whether it will do any good, not ask whether it will kill any civilians. And if you do ask those questions, it means you're on the side of America's enemies. It's an incredibly authoritarian tactic that gets used to suppress debate.
Yeah, it's poison. I agree. Glenn Greenwald, thank you, as always.
Good to be with you.
Richard Goodstein is an attorney who advised both of Hillary Clinton's campaigns, and he sports strikes on Syria. Richard joins us tonight. So, look, it seems to me, well, no matter what conclusion you reach, the first question for everybody ought to be the same, which is, how is this in America's strategic interest? Right. And I haven't met a single person who can answer it or is even willing to try. That's a problem, wouldn't you say?
It would be if there really was no answer. I did see your interview with Senator Wicker last night, and you asked the question, how do we even know Assad was behind this, right? Because General Mattis basically said we weren't sure. But what we know is that a UN commission saw links between sarin gas that we know was used and it had the hallmarks of what the Assad army had.
I mean, look, I'm totally open-minded.
Right.
I'm sure not here flacking for Assad, my God.
Right.
I just want to be certain that we're acting on the basis of verifiable information. And in the case of this last weekend's attack with the chlorine gas, let's just stop lying. There's no way that we could know in 48 hours, 24 hours, when the cable news shows started pushing for war, that Assad was behind it. So let's stop lying. That's my only point.
Right. Well, I'm not sure who it is. Look, it had all the hallmarks of something that we know Assad did. He was destroying towns willy-nilly. And the notion that somehow the rebels would kill their own women and children and have them foaming at the mouth and so forth to make a point for CNN or Fox, that seems a bit much, right? But I think what we're trying to do is...
It's a bit much. Okay, so the first sarin gas attack took place within a week of the Trump administration saying we're no longer going to try to remove Assad from power. That happened, bam, we went right back to the original policy. This attack took place less than a week after the Trump people said we're going to pull our troops out.
Right.
So, look, I don't know who did it. Right. I'm not accusing anybody. I'm merely saying there's clearly questions that we need to be asking about this, and anyone who does, I'm the living example of this, is shouted down and called a tool of Putin. Like, that's insane.
I wish I took as much pleasure from my critics coming to me as you do, incidentally, so I applaud you for feeling the umbrage that you do.
About me.
No, look,
I'm attacked all the time. I don't care.
Yeah.
I care about when and where we commit American troops. I have a son who's 21.
Yes.
This is not a joke.
Right. So it's not a question, frankly, of committing troops. Sure, there will be troops. We're talking about degrading their Air Force, degrading their helicopters, doing something, frankly, that we didn't do.
What does degrading mean?
It means basically having so many of their planes...
killing people. Let's not use euphemisms
Fine.
here.
Let's blow up and airplanes and helicopters, if there are people in it, so be it. They made their choice to align with Assad, and these are the very people who we seem are dropping, I think we actually have had photographic evidence, dropping chlorine bombs on civilian populations.
So who's going to...
Do I feel badly about that? No. Do I think it's something the United States should be doing? Yes. And if we don't...
Hold on. What's the goal? Just let's be really clear. We take Assad out, and don't tell me that's not the plan. When you wage war against a government, you're not rooting for its continuation. Yeah. Who runs Syria?
Yeah. And I'm saying I don't know, actually, that taking him out is the objective. And I agree with you.
So what's the objective? To continue the war, kill more people?
I think the objective is so that Assad knows that his dropping chlorine gas on people is something where he's going to pay a price.
But we're not sure he did it.
Well, and I think we have to establish whether he did it or not. And the fact is, it shouldn't be a feel-good exercise like it was last year. When Trump was basically talking about that great piece of chocolate cake with Xi, the time he was dropping bombs on those runways, that was a feel-good exercise. If we're going to do something, we should do something so that Assad can't do it as easily again.
Assuming, but we don't know that
when
he did do it.
I agree.
So does it bother you when there's universal consensus on the left and among establishment Republicans that we just know? and like stop asking questions. Let's just go ahead and do this for reasons that we can't fully explain. We can't tell you how it's going to make you richer or safer or happier, but just shut up and do it anyway.
Well, it
That
will
doesn't
make
bother
us
you?
better because we think we need to go after war crimes. The question is whether Assad did it. It has all the hallmarks of Assad. I don't blame people for concluding it did. Do we need to establish with some certainty that it was Assad? Yeah, we should
So
probably
every
do that.
time a government does something appalling or kills civilians,
No.
we need to bomb them.
No, I think that's
no. Okay, right.
We can't address every war crime,
no.
but those that we can address, yes, I think we should.
Just so we can. Okay, because I can think of okay,
plenty more. I grant you.
Yeah. All right, Richard. Thank you.
My pleasure.
My head is spinning. One of the internet's top prostitution sites just shut down, and feminists are delighted. Wait, what? No, they're furious. It's getting confusing in feminist world, so we're going to explain it to you. Is prostitution pro-women, or is it the exploitation of women? We'll give you the new line on that next. The site Backpage.com, it's a classified ad site, has been shut down, and several top officials who worked there have gotten in trouble. They've been indicted over allegations that that site facilitated prostitution and child sex trafficking. You'd think feminists would be happy about this, and some are, but others are outraged by it. Women's March tweeted, quote, "The shutting down of Backpage is an absolute crisis for sex workers," that's the new term for prostitutes, "who rely on that site to safely get in touch with clients. Sex workers' rights are women's rights." Amy Peikoff is a talk show host and a feminist who supports keeping Backpage up, and she joins us today. Amy, great to see you.
Hi, Tucker. Thanks for having me back again.
So I know that you're a libertarian, which I don't agree with you, but I certainly respect it. I think it's an intellectually coherent way to look at the world.
Sure.
But I also know you're a feminist, and they seem at odds with each other. So the libertarian side of you would say, look, you know, people have a right to enter into voluntary contracts. Prostitution falls under that heading. It's fine. But the feminist part of you can't really believe that prostitution is empowering to women because it's the opposite of that.
Right, but here's the thing. We're talking about government shutting down a website, and regardless of what you and I, Tucker, think ethically about prostitution and other types of sex work, the question to ask is whether it violates anyone's rights. And we need to, in order to empower women, leave all choices up to them in terms of how to conduct their own personal sex lives and everything else.
Right? That's the libertarian side, and I get that. I mean, again, I don't fully agree with it, but I think it's a reasonable thing to say. But the feminist position has nothing to do with that. The feminist position is about empowerment and dignity and not objectifying women, reducing them to their physical appearance, which is, of course, what prostitution does. It degrades women completely.
My version, I mean, insofar as I consider myself a feminist, I consider myself a feminist in terms of protecting women's rights. So whenever there is an actual threat to women's rights, I am going to be there and argue against whatever it is and say that we need to take some action accordingly. But insofar as this website was just facilitating transactions having to do with prostitution or other types of sex work, then there's no rights violation, and you need to leave the choice up to the women. We're not going to, you know, it's not the American way to force a particular type of lifestyle choice on someone just because you disagree with it from your own ethical perspective. We need to back up and look at the perspective of individual rights.
Right, but that doesn't mean that all, quote, lifestyle choices are the same. And I don't know why a feminist group like Women's March would describe prostitutes as, quote, sex workers. Many of them are really young. They're being pimped out by older men, sleeping with creepy... I mean, the whole thing is, like, disgusting,
But, you know,
actually.
that problem would be only worse. That problem would be only worse, as I understand it, if they're not online opportunities for these women. And, you know, Tucker, there are two further kind of troubling implications of something like this, shutting down a site like Backpage.com. One is that it is in conjunction with a couple pieces of legislation that are also troubling, designed to remove content about sex off of the internet. And I myself, I think that sex is a good thing. I don't think that we should be shutting down content on the internet, and there's been a lot of preemptive removing of content from Reddit and other sites because of this. And then the second thing is that I think this is ominous in terms of other types of websites and tech companies coming under government control in the future. I mean, we just saw Zuckerberg in front of Congress today, and you think, oh, well, right now it's just a prostitution and sex trafficking website, but next it's going to be Tinder because people are using that to hook up, and it's sex, and, you know, maybe we can get away with controlling that or shutting that down.
Yeah, I guess I used to
and
feel
then,
that
and then
way.
it'll be Facebook Facebook and Twitter. And this is the problem, Tucker.
And I literally can't wait for that day, to be honest with you.
But today's websites, Tucker, they are not only the method of distributing content, including all of the content that is necessary to change the culture for the better, they also collect information about users. So it's a very different type of media.
I'm aware of it, but let me just ask you.
But we have to be very careful about putting that under government control, because
I guess
think
if you think the government is more sinister, I would not agree with you. I agreed with you 10 years ago, back when I was a mindless libertarian who thought that government was the greatest threat to our freedom. But government is elected.
But we do not want to end up in Orwell's 1984. We do not want to end up in Orwell's 1984. And if you think that information is troubling in the hands of somebody who wants to make money, think of it in the hands of government.
Which is elected, unlike Zuckerberg. But Amy, thank you. It's always nice to have you here. I like smart guests, and you are. Mark Zuckerberg testifying in the Hill is a big story, but another tech titan has revealed his vision of the future, and it'll wreck your night. Stay tuned.